anyone looking around, gazing at the cranberry bogs in Massachusetts in early 1763, might think many things. They might think about the sunrise. They might think about the mist coming off the pond. They might think about what their neighbors had done earlier that week. But one thing they would not think about, one thing that wouldn't even enter their mind, would be the possibility of the colonists uniting together and breaking away from Great Britain. They were staunchly loyal to the King of England and had no intention whatsoever of breaking away. In fact, it was utterly unthinkable, something that couldn't even cross our imagination, that the U.S. would break away from Great Britain. And yet, a mere 20 years later, that is exactly what would happen. The colonists in Great Britain would engage in a major war in which these 13 scraggly, puny little colonies would join forces, take on the most powerful empire in the world, and would actually gain independence. This is the question that will drive our next couple of lessons. How could this happen? How could something unthinkable in 1763 come to full reality by 1783? To answer this, we first must look at events that transpired in 1753. So we need to go back before 1763 and look at first the events of 1753, I should say. And what happened in 1753? There was a young, cocky soldier stationed in western Pennsylvania. Somebody who really had a big head, thought he was just all that in a bag of chips. He was leading a regiment, and he ambushed a group of peaceful French soldiers who were not doing anything to the colonists. He ambushed the French soldiers, and then that resulted in the leader of the French troop and resulted in the French leader's death. It ended up sparking war, a full-out war in the Americas. And the war, not only that, spread to Europe. And this war would last until 1763. And so this one cocky young man, 21-year-old, sparked a giant war that reverberated all over Europe. You might be asking, who was this cocky young American who just thought so much of himself that he was willing to take on the French? Who was this? Must be just a total jerk, this arrogant young man. Who was it? It was none other than young George Washington. You can see right there, there is a picture of George Washington when he engaged in this war, which would later become known as the French-Indian War, and where he's not quite as young. Two pictures of him. Now, during the French-Indian War, some colonists realized that they needed to, in order to secure the safety of the colonists, needed to find a way to unite all of the colonies, that they could have some sort of plan for common defense, that individually the colonists were weak, but when they joined forces, could be strong. And in fact, Benjamin Franklin himself went to Albany to present this plan of a union. And he went to Albany in 1754. He met with delegates, representatives from all the colonies, and he said, we should join forces. We should be as one. We can be stronger when we are united. And in fact, he even made this nifty little political cartoon. As you can see, the snake cut up into different pieces, because apparently snakes don't live if you cut them up into pieces. Anyways, he showed this nifty piece of artwork. He said, we need to join or die. And apparently the colonists would have preferred death, because they did not join together. They rejected the plan for union. They could not even get together, even to fight a common enemy. Even when they were fighting against the French, even when they were fighting against Native Americans, they could not join together. Which made it even more perplexing that during the Revolutionary War, they were able to join and unite to defeat Britain only 20 years earlier. So, during the French-Indian War, of course, though the French-Indian War had many battles, the long and short of it, of course, was that by 1763, the British had won. The British now had a bigger chunk of land, but more portentously, when the war ended, even though Great Britain had won the war, they had also accumulated massive debts. And in fact, their debts had climbed from 75 to 130 million pounds, which is an increase of a little over 50% in just 10 years. Massive explosion of debt. And the reason for this is that the nation, Great Britain, had been fighting off and on, had been fighting this war, other wars for decades. And so as time went on, they had borrowed more and more money because, frankly, wars cost money. So the British owed huge amounts of money, and they needed to find a way to pay it off. Well, one of the ways in which they decided to save money, because they needed to cut costs, and they also needed to raise revenue. One of the ways that they decided to cut costs was to stop providing military help to the colonists. In other words, they were not going to give them more soldiers, more ammunition, more assistance. Now, for that to happen, the colonists needed to stop getting into conflicts with Native Americans because the British felt like they were always jumping in and bailing them out. So you see, it goes like this. Colonists get into conflicts with Native Americans. The British military comes in, bails them out, but that costs money. So, to save money, colonists need to stop fighting Native Americans. So, how is Great Britain going to prevent the colonists from getting into these conflicts? Well, this is how. To keep the colonists firmly within their own territory. In other words, build a big giant fence around their land and then make sure the colonists can't get out, because the colonists wanted to take over more and more land, and they were going into Native American territory. And when they went into Native American territory, the Native Americans didn't like it. They fought back, and then once they fought back, that caused conflict. So you make sure that the colonists stay within their own land. But here's the problem. During the French-Indian War, the colonists believed that they were fighting for a big piece of land called the Ohio Valley. And they spent the entire war thinking about the Ohio Valley. They had been fighting, dying, and during the war, the one thought that kept them going as the suffering was going on, as they were going through privation, as they were going through hunger, as they saw people dying from disease and people getting shot, the one thing that gets them through the day is thinking, when this war ends, we're going to get the Ohio Valley. That was what they'd been thinking of. But then, in 1763, Great Britain issued the Proclamation that is known as the Proclamation of 1763 that said the Ohio Valley is hands off to the colonists. The colonists must not cross the Appalachian Mountains. So imagine you had spent 10 years fighting this brutal war, and the only thing you think about is the Ohio Valley and how you are going to get that land, and then suddenly when the war is over, the mother country, Great Britain, says, hands off. That was the issue. The first issue that caused hatred and animosity in the colonists towards the mother country. They felt betrayed. And they felt that what they had been promised and what they had wanted and what they were hoping to get was suddenly denied. And this caused them to be very angry with Great Britain. And so this was the first spark in the events that would eventually lead to the Revolutionary War. And what we will continue with on the next video is we're going to talk about how Great Britain made some other decisions and did some other things that angered the colonists, irritated them, prodded them, poked them, and eventually got them to the point of full rebellion. Have a good afternoon, and I will see you tomorrow, or if this is the weekend, I will see you Monday.